The wind swept across the mountain pass like 1,000 knives. Snow lashed against the jagged pines, burying the trail until it was no more than a ghost under the white. A lone rider pressed forward, cloak pulled tight, her horse straining against the storm. Her name was Eliza. She had been warned not to travel the range alone this late in the season, but pride and determination were stronger than fear. She had left behind a town where whispers cut deeper than any blade, and she had promised herself she would never bow to pity. She rode because she must, because going back was worse than pressing on. The blizzard thickened. Her horse stumbled, sides heaving, and Eliza pulled the reins, searching for even the faintest sign of shelter. She could see nothing but swirling white. The mountain seemed to swallow the world. Cold bit into her fingers, even through her gloves. She gritted her teeth and pressed on, whispering soft encouragement to the weary animal beneath her. Out of the storm, a shape moved. A rider on a dark horse pushing through the snow with grim purpose. For an instant, fear leaped into Eliza's chest. Bandits were not rare in these mountains. But as the man drew closer, his face came into view, weathered, hard, and shadowed beneath a wide hat. He carried no smile, only the quiet patience of one who had faced storms before. His name was Jack, though she did not know it yet. He slowed his horse, studying her with sharp eyes. "You'll freeze to death out here," his voice cut through the wind. It was not gentle, but steady, like the crack of an axe against wood. Eliza straightened in the saddle. "I can manage." He said nothing at first, only let his gaze sweep over her horse's trembling legs and her own shivering frame. Then he turned his mount. "Follow me. There's a cabin not far." She hesitated. Pride urged her to refuse. Trusting a stranger in the wilderness could be as deadly as the storm itself. But the snow was falling harder, and her breath came in ragged bursts. At last she nudged her horse after him, though her chin lifted high, a silent vow that she owed him nothing. The ride was grueling. The path wound through trees heavy with snow, every step slower than the last. At last, the dim outline of a broken cabin appeared, its roof sagging, its walls half-rotted but still standing against the storm. Jack dismounted first, stomping snow from his boots, then pushed the warped door open with a shoulder. Inside was dark and cold, but at least it was shelter. Eliza followed, her breath clouding in the air. The cabin smelled of old wood and dust. Broken furniture lay in the corner, and through cracks in the walls the wind whispered. Yet it was 4 walls, and for tonight that was salvation. Jack set about with quiet efficiency. He pulled a few scraps of wood from the corner, struck a flint, and coaxed a weak fire into life. Orange light flickered, casting his face in harsh lines. He offered no words of comfort, only a nod toward the hearth. Eliza knelt near the flames, holding her hands out. The warmth was faint but precious. The silence stretched between them. Outside, the storm howled like a living beast, rattling the walls and filling every pause with menace. Eliza watched him from the corner of her eye. He moved with the ease of a man who had lived long in hard places, careful and deliberate, wasting nothing. He looked as though nothing could shake him. And yet when he glanced toward her there was a flicker, something softer hidden beneath all that steel. Eliza sat straighter, refusing to let exhaustion show. She would not ask for help. She would not give him the satisfaction. But deep down, beneath layers of stubborn resolve, a quiet truth gnawed at her. The storm was stronger than her pride, and she would not survive the night alone. The fire gave little heat, but it was enough to keep their fingers from going numb. Jack sat on the floorboards with his back against the wall, his hat pulled low, his coat draped heavy over his shoulders. Eliza kept close to the flames, though not too close to him. The storm outside screamed against the cabin, snow piling against the door as if the mountain itself wanted them buried. Hours seemed to drag. The air grew colder with every breath. Eliza's body shook in small tremor she tried to hide, her jaw clenching to keep her teeth from chattering. She lifted her chin, determined to look unbroken, but the frost had already crept deep into her bones. Jack studied her for a long moment. then spoke in that steady, flat voice. "This fire won't be enough," Eliza frowned. "I'll manage." He didn't move, only tipped his hat back to look her in the eye. "No, you won't, not alone." His words held no pity, no softness, just plain truth. "Share my blanket, or die." The words hung in the air, sharp as the wind outside. Eliza's pride flared. She turned her face from him, staring at the flames. "I said I can manage." But even as she said it, a violent shiver racked her body. Her fingers felt like ice, her legs numb. She knew he was right, yet admitting it felt like surrender. Jack shifted, pulling out a thick wool blanket from his pack. He spread it across his lap, waiting. He didn't argue, didn't push, only watched her with quiet certainty, as if time itself would prove his point. Eliza's pride fought her fear. The idea of pressing against a stranger in the dark filled her with unease. She didn't know this man. For all his calm, he could be dangerous. But another shiver shook her shoulders, harder this time, stealing her breath. Her body betrayed her. At last she exhaled a cloud of cold air, her eyes flashing with reluctant fire. "Fine, but don't think this means anything." Jack gave a slight nod, nothing more. He lifted the blanket open, a silent invitation. Eliza crawled over, stiff and guarded, every movement heavy with resistance. When she settled beside him, the heat of his body was startling. The warmth wrapped around her quicker than the flames ever had. The blanket came down over them both. Eliza stayed tense, her shoulders stiff, her chin lifted high, even as her body betrayed her, pressing closer for heat. Jack said nothing. His stillness was both strange and steadying, like leaning against a tree in the middle of a storm. Minutes passed. Slowly, the shaking in her limbs eased. The fire crackled, shadows dancing across the walls. She could hear the rhythm of his breathing, slow and even. Her thoughts wandered as she stared into the flames. She thought of the town she had left behind, of faces that never saw her as enough. She thought of her father's harsh voice, her brother's careless laughter. She had vowed to prove herself strong, yet here she was, alive only because of a stranger's blanket. The bitterness burned in her chest. Jack's voice cut through the silence, low and calm. "Storm like this will strip the pride from any soul." "Doesn't mean you're weak." Eliza turned her head sharply. "I didn't ask for your wisdom." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a frown. "Didn't offer wisdom, just truth." She looked away again, pulling the blanket tighter around herself, pretending it was only the fire keeping her warm. Outside, the storm raged harder, rattling the cabin with icy hands. Yet inside, for the first time that night, Eliza's heartbeat began to steady. The storm did not ease. All through the night, the wind tore at the cabin like wolves clawing at a carcass. Snow pressed against the walls, seeping through cracks, dusting the floor in pale frost. But under the blanket, the two of them stayed alive, their breath clouding the air between them. Eliza tried to keep her distance, but warmth had its own rules. Slowly, her shoulder brushed against Jack's arm, then her head tilted without her meaning to. Each time she caught herself and straightened, but the cold dragged her back. Jack never moved, never spoke of it. He was steady as a mountain, letting her lean without demand. At last, when the fire had burned low to glowing embers, Eliza whispered into the silence. "Why were you out in the storm?" Jack shifted only slightly, his voice calm. "Trail work. The fence broke on the north ridge. Couldn't wait. Winter doesn't care for delay." Not much of an answer, but more than nothing. Eliza studied his profile, the strong lines carved by years in the sun, the way his eyes reflected the dim light. He looked like a man who had carried heavy things, burdens that left their mark. "And you?" he asked after a long pause. Eliza stiffened. No one ever asked without judgment. She thought of lying, of tossing back a sharp remark to keep him at a distance. But something in the storm's howling pressed honesty out of her. "I left," she said simply. "Left before they could throw me aside." Jack waited. His silence was not impatient. It was open, like he was giving her space. "My father said I was no use." My brother said the same, just with a laugh. Her hands tightened in the blanket. "I swore I'd prove them wrong." The fire cracked, a soft spark rising and dying. Jack didn't speak for a long time. When he did, his tone was steady. Folks who measure worth that way, they don't see straight. Ain't your fault, their eyes are blind. Eliza blinked, startled by the blunt kindness. She almost scoffed, but the words had slipped inside before she could push them away. She hugged her arms tighter, unwilling to let him see how much it meant. Silence fell again, but it was different this time. Not sharp, not heavy. Just quiet. Hours dragged on. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, their cries long and hungry. Eliza's heart tightened. She had always hated that sound. It reminded her how small a person could feel under the endless sky. Jack's hand rested near the knife at his belt, though he stayed relaxed. "They won't come close if we're careful," he murmured. "Have you fought them before?" "Once or twice. Don't aim to again tonight unless we must." His calmness steadied her. She lay back against the wall, drawing the blanket closer. The storm's roar became a dull hum in her ears. Fatigue tugged at her, heavy and relentless. Before sleep claimed her, she whispered a thought she hadn't meant to share. "It feels strange, not being alone in it." Jack turned his head, but in the dim firelight she couldn't read his eyes. He didn't answer, only gave the smallest nod. And for the first time in many winters, Eliza let herself drift to sleep, with trust resting beside her. Eliza woke with a start. The fire was nothing but ash, and the cabin lay in gray half-light. Her breath came out in pale mist, and for a moment she forgot where she was. Then she felt the heavy blanket draped over her, and the solid presence at her side. Jack sat awake, his back to the wall, hat pulled low, rifle laid across his knees. "You didn't sleep?" she asked, her voice rough with cold and weariness. "Storm doesn't rest. Neither should I." His tone was calm, not accusing. "Just for the act?" Eliza pushed herself upright, hugging the blanket close. She had never shared such closeness with a stranger. Pride told her to pull away. Survival told her to stay under its warmth. She settled for something between, keeping the blanket around her shoulders while she sat apart. The wind still howled outside, but lighter now, as though the worst of it had passed. A pale shaft of light broke through the cracks in the wall, touching the dust that hung in the air. Her stomach growled softly. Jack glanced over, then reached into his pack. He pulled out a strip of dried meat and a small piece of bread, handing it to her without a word. Eliza hesitated. She hated the thought of appearing needy, but hunger was sharper than pride. She took it, careful not to meet his gaze. "Thank you," she said quietly. Jack chewed on his own strip, slow and steady. "You travel far?" "Far enough," she replied. "Looking for someplace new. Someplace I can be more than what they called me." Jack didn't press, didn't ask for details. He only nodded once. "Land's wide enough. Always room to start again." His words lingered. Eliza studied him, puzzled by his stillness. He wasn't like the men she knew in town, full of sharp words and careless boasts. He spoke little, but each word seemed carved from something solid. Another silence fell, though this one felt easier. The storm had eased its voice, the world outside quieter as though listening. Then came the sound. A low growl carried on the wind. Eliza froze. Her eyes darted to the door. Jack's hand tightened on the rifle. "Wolves?" she whispered. He nodded once, his face unreadable, drawn by the scent. "They know something lives inside." Her heart pounded in her chest. She had heard stories of wolves but never faced them. She pressed the blanket tighter around her shoulders, wishing it were armor. Jack rose slowly, every movement quiet and controlled. He checked the rifle, then glanced at her. "Stay close to the fire pit. If they break in, you grab what's sharp and fight." Eliza swallowed hard. "I've never—" "Then you learn fast," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. The growls grew louder, circling the cabin. Scratches clawed at the wood outside, and a sharp bark split the air. Eliza's throat tightened. She wanted to hide, to curl into the shadows, but she forced herself to grip a splintered piece of wood from the broken chair in the corner. Her hands trembled, but she raised them like a weapon. Jack glanced at her once more, giving a small nod of approval. "That's it. Fear's no shame, but you don't let it rule you. The words steadied her more than she expected. She held the wood tighter, setting her jaw. Outside, the wolves pressed closer. Inside, two strangers waited, cold, hungry, and afraid, yet bound together by something the storm had forged. The growls circled the cabin like ghosts in the snow. Eliza's breath came quick. Her fingers clutched tight around the broken wood she held as a weapon. Jack stood near the door, rifle steady in his hands, his face calm as stone. The first thud hit the door. The wood shuddered. Eliza jumped, heart pounding, but Jack didn't move. Another thud, then a long, dragging scrape. A wolf was testing the cabin, pressing against its weakness. They'll try the cracks first, Jack murmured. Looking for weakness, same as men do. Eliza swallowed, her throat dry. And if they find one, then we fight. The door shook harder, claws raking across the boards. A snarl ripped through the air. Eliza's pulse hammered in her ears. She thought of running, of hiding in the corner, but Jack's stillness rooted her. If he could stand, then so could she. The first wolf pushed through, its head forcing past a gap in the half-rotten doorframe. Yellow eyes gleamed in the dim light, teeth bared, steam rising from its breath. Eliza gasped, raising her makeshift club without thinking. Jack fired. The shot cracked loudly in the small cabin, smoke filling the air. The wolf yelped and fell back into the snow outside. For a moment there was silence. Then the howls rose higher, angry and hungry. They won't stop now, Jack said quietly. He reloaded fast, hands steady. They'll come harder. The next strike was at the window, a blur of gray fur and snarling teeth. Glass shattered, shards scattering across the floor. Eliza stumbled back, then swung wildly as another wolf tried to force its way in. Her strike landed clumsily, but hard enough to make it yelp and retreat. She stood shaking, her knuckles raw but still on her feet. Jack turned and shot again, dropping another wolf as it lunged through the gap. The cabin filled with the echo of battle, the crack of the rifle, the snarl of beasts, the ragged sound of Eliza's breath. One wolf slipped inside, its body lean and wild, fur bristling, eyes fixed on her. Eliza froze. Time slowed. She saw every detail, the curl of its lip, the spray of spit, the bunching of its legs ready to leap. She swung with all her strength. The wood connected with a sharp crack. The wolf yelped, staggered, then lunged again. Jack's rifle thundered, and the beast collapsed at her feet still. Eliza stood trembling, her weapon raised, her body shaking so hard she could barely breathe. Jack lowered his rifle, his voice even. Good, you stood your ground. I almost froze, she whispered, shame burning in her chest. But you didn't, he said. That's the difference. Another long howl rose outside, then faded. The storm's roar returned to fill the silence. Slowly, the scratching and growling drifted away. The wolves, sensing the fight was too costly, retreated into the storm. Eliza lowered the broken wood, her arms weak. Her knees threatened to give out. She leaned against the wall, gasping. The body of the wolf lay at her feet, blood staining the floorboards. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The fire's glow flickered over their faces, tired but alive. At last, Eliza whispered, her voice hoarse. I never thought I could do that. Jack glanced at her, his eyes steady. You can do more than you think. You just needed the chance to see it. Something inside her shifted then, not just relief but a strange, fierce pride. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel useless. She felt alive. The cabin was quiet again, but the silence felt different now. Not the cold emptiness of before, but a heavy calm after the storm of claws and teeth. Smoke from the rifle still lingered in the air, mixing with the sharp scent of blood. Eliza sat on the floor, her hands trembling, her chest heaving as if she had run miles. Jack moved without hurry. He set the rifle aside and dragged the wolf's body to the corner. His motions were simple, practiced, as though dealing with death was nothing new. When he was done, he stoked the embers of the fire, coaxing them back to life until the flames glowed again. Eliza watched him, still gripping the broken wood in her hands. Her arms ached, her knuckles raw, but she couldn't let go. The fight still echoed inside her. You can put it down now. Jack said quietly, not looking at her. Her grip tightened. If they come back, and they won't, not tonight. You scared 'em off good. His calmness wrapped around her like a blanket. Slowly she set the wood aside, her breath shaky. She glanced at him, half expecting to see mockery in his eyes. But there was none. Only that steady stillness again. Why did you trust me to fight? She asked softly. You didn't even know if I could. Jack shrugged. Storm like this, you don't have the luxury of doubt. Besides, I saw it in your eyes. Scared, sure, but not broken. Her chest tightened at his words. All her life, others had only spoken of what she couldn't do. Now here was a stranger saying the opposite. She didn't know what to say back. The fire warmed the cabin again, light flickering over the worn wood. Eliza pulled the blanket around her shoulders, leaning against the wall. Fatigue weighed her down, but inside her something stirred. Something more than fear, something that felt almost like strength. Jack sat down across from her, his hat set aside. In the glow of the fire, his face looked older than before, lined with hardship but also carved with patience. He cleaned the rifle with slow, steady hands. You fought wolves before, Eliza said after a while. He gave a small nod. Out here it happens. Fences break, herds scatter, and wolves come running. Learned young to stand or get swallowed. Weren't you afraid? His eyes lifted to hers. Of course. Fear keeps you sharp, but letting it rule you, that's what kills. She thought about that, replaying the moment the wolf had lunged for her. Her body had wanted to run, to hide, but her arms had swung instead, and she had survived. Her eyes drifted to the fallen wolf in the corner. She whispered almost to herself, I never thought I had it in me. Jack's voice was low, steady. Most people don't till the moment comes. Then they find out who they really are. Eliza looked into the fire, her thoughts heavy but alive. The storm outside raged on, but inside the cabin, warmth spread slowly. Not just from the flames, but from the strange bond forming in the silence. Her eyes grew heavy. She fought the pull of sleep, but her body gave in at last. Before she drifted away, she felt the blanket shift, a steady hand making sure it covered her fully. She didn't move, didn't speak. For the first time in a long while, she let herself rest without fear. Eliza woke to the sound of dripping water. The storm had weakened in the night, and now snow melted through cracks in the roof, tapping onto the floor in small puddles. The cabin felt less like a tomb and more like a place still holding on. She stretched slowly, her body sore from cold, from fear, from swinging wood at a wolf. Jack was already awake, crouched near the door. He had stacked snow against the gaps to block the wind, his motions calm, steady, as if every task had its place. His hat was pulled low, but when he turned, his eyes met hers. You're alive, he said simply. Eliza gave a faint smile despite herself. I suppose I am. Her stomach growled again, louder this time. Jack handed her another strip of dried meat. She took it without argument, hunger leaving no room for pride. They ate in silence, the fire crackling softly between them. After a while, she spoke. You could have left me. Easier to ride alone than drag a stranger into shelter. Jack looked at her for a moment, then shook his head. I've buried too many in storms. Didn't care to bury another. The words struck her harder than she expected. She studied him, noticing the lines around his eyes, the heaviness in his shoulders. He had seen loss, carried it with him like a shadow. You've lost people, she said gently. He didn't answer at once. He rubbed the back of his neck, staring into the fire. A wife once, a child. Fever took him before the first snow. After that, it was just me. Eliza's breath caught. She hadn't expected him to say it so plainly. No man in her town ever spoke of grief except to curse it away. Jack's honesty felt raw, heavy, but also strangely human. I'm sorry, she whispered. He gave a small nod. Nothing more. Storms take what they want. All a man can do is keep standing. Eliza wrapped the blanket tighter, staring into the flames. She thought of her own losses, not of death, but of dignity, of worth stolen by the voices that called her nothing. Maybe their griefs were different, but the weight of them felt alike. For a while, they didn't speak. Only the fire filled the silence. Then Eliza said softly, "You think the storm will end soon?" Jack tilted his head, listening to the wind. "Sky's lighter. Won't last much longer. By morning, we'll see the trail again." Relief and dread mixed in her chest. Relief that she might walk free of the cabin. Dread that once they left, this strange closeness might end. She glanced at him. His jaw was firm, his hands rough, his body still like a wall against the world. Yet last night he had pulled the blanket over her shoulders, careful, without a word. The thought warmed her more than the fire. Outside, the wolves did not return. The storm's voice grew softer, like a giant breathing out the last of its anger. Inside, the two strangers sat close to the fire, not speaking much but no longer afraid of silence. Eliza leaned back against the wall, her eyes half closed. "Feels different now, quieter," Jack nodded. "Storm's breaking. Always does." She looked at him, studying the lines of his face in the firelight. For the first time since she'd left her old life, she didn't feel completely alone. And that, she thought, might be the strangest part of all. Morning came gray and cold. Light filtered weakly through the cracks in the cabin walls, painting thin lines across the floor. The storm had finally eased. Snow still lay deep outside, but the sky no longer roared with anger. Instead, it was silent, heavy, waiting. Eliza stirred, sitting up beneath the blanket. Her body ached from the hard floor, but she was alive, more alive than she had felt in years. Jack was already at the door, pushing it open a crack to look out. Snow tumbled inward, but the door gave way. He studied the horizon, then spoke. "Sky's clearing. We'll be able to ride once the horses catch their breath." Eliza stood, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. She stepped beside him, peering out. The world was white, endless, the mountains sharp against the sky. The storm had left the land buried and still, but the light broke through in streaks of pale gold. It looked almost holy. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Jack nodded. Storms always leave the world looking clean. Doesn't mean it's easier. She thought about that, about how storms in her own life had left scars instead of beauty. But now, standing there, she wondered if maybe both could be true. They stepped back inside, closing the door against the biting air. Jack packed his rifle, checked his gear, and moved with the same quiet rhythm. Eliza gathered her few belongings, little more than a satchel and her pride, though the latter felt different now. The fire had burned low, just embers left. Eliza crouched and poked it with a stick, watching the sparks rise. "When we leave here," she asked slowly, "will you go back to being alone?" Jack's hand stilled. He didn't answer right away. His eyes lowered, focused on the rifle in his lap. "That's the way it's been for years. But does it have to be?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. Her cheeks flushed with heat, though the cabin was cold. Jack looked at her then. His gaze was steady, but something flickered deep within it, something softer than before. "Depends on whether a person wants to walk beside me." "Ain't many that do." Eliza held his gaze. She wanted to say something, anything, but her tongue felt heavy. Instead, she drew the blanket tighter, heart pounding at her own boldness. A howl carried faintly across the snow, distant but sharp. Eliza tensed. Jack stood, rifle in hand, listening. The sound faded. He lowered the weapon, though his eyes remained watchful. "They'll keep their distance now," he said, "but they'll remember." Eliza shivered, though not from the cold. She thought of the fight, of how close death had come and how Jack had stood with her. The memory burned bright inside her. For a long while they sat in silence, each lost in thought. The cabin smelled of smoke and iron, of storm and survival. Outside, the sun pushed higher, melting ice from the trees. Eliza finally whispered, "When you told me to share your blanket or die, I thought you were mocking me. I thought it was just another man giving orders." Jack leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Wasn't meant that way. I meant the truth. And you listened." Her lips curved, the faintest smile breaking through. "Then hold me tighter. I might just believe you mean more than survival." Jack's eyes softened, and for once he didn't look away. The day stretched on, the storm's fury now just a memory. The cabin, once a prison of cold and fear, felt strangely smaller now, as if it had held more than just two bodies fighting for warmth. It had held their truths, their wounds, and something new neither had expected. Eliza sat by the fire, though it was fading to its last glow. She turned a piece of broken wood in her hands, the same one she had swung at the wolf. It felt lighter now, less like a weapon, more like proof that she had stood, that she had fought. Jack was near the door, tightening straps on his gear, checking everything twice. He moved like a man used to traveling alone, but his eyes, when they lifted to hers, held a question he didn't speak. Eliza broke the silence first. "I'll never forget last night." Jack gave a short nod. "Storm like that sticks with a person." "That's not what I mean," she said softly. Her eyes met his. "I never thought I'd find strength in myself. Not until you forced me to face it." He leaned back against the doorframe, his face unreadable but his voice low. Strength was already there. Storm just pulled it out. The quiet between them felt heavier than the storm had. Eliza drew a breath, steadying herself. "You asked if anyone would walk beside you. Maybe I could. Maybe I'd want to." Jack's jaw tightened. For a moment he didn't move. Then he stepped closer, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. His shadow fell across her, tall and steady. "You choose a hard trail," he said. "I've got little to offer. Just land, work, and silence most days." Eliza looked up at him, her eyes fierce despite the softness in her voice. "I'm not asking for gold or fine words. I just want a place where I'm not called useless. A place where I can stand, fight, and belong." The fire popped softly, filling the silence. Jack studied her as if weighing her words, searching for falsehood. But all he found was the same stubborn pride he had seen from the first moment, only now tempered with courage. Finally his mouth curved, the faintest ghost of a smile. "Maybe you belong right here, then." Eliza's breath caught. For a heartbeat she thought the world outside had gone still, listening with her. She swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. "Then hold me tighter, cowboy. Not because I'll die if you don't, but because I'll live better if you do." The words hung in the air like a vow. Jack knelt beside her, the firelight catching the hard lines of his face and softening them. He didn't rush, didn't force. His arm brushed hers under the blanket, strong and steady. For the first time since the storm began, Eliza leaned without resistance. They sat in silence, close enough to feel the shared warmth, not just of bodies, but of something growing deeper. Outside, snow slid from the roof in heavy sheets. The storm had ended, and with it the walls between them had thinned. The cabin no longer felt like a ruin. It felt like the beginning. The dawn broke clear and bright as if the storm had never existed. Snow sparkled like glass over the hills, the air sharp and clean, the silence almost holy. Eliza stepped out of the cabin doorway, her breath making little clouds that drifted and vanished in the sun. The world looked new, untouched. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, though the chill felt less cruel now. Behind her, Jack came out, his hat pulled low against the morning light. He paused beside her, squinting across the endless white. For a long time they just stood there, two figures alone in the wilderness, bound by what they had endured. Eliza broke the quiet. "It's strange. I thought I'd feel small out here after everything. But I don't, I feel—" She searched for the word. "Alive." Jack glanced at her, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. "Alive's a good place to start." She turned to look at him fully, the sun catching in her eyes. "And not alone." His gaze softened, though he said nothing. He reached out, steady and sure, and touched her hand. The gesture was simple, but it carried weight. More than promises, more than words. Eliza squeezed back. The pride that had once walled her off now felt like something else. Strength she could choose to share, not hide behind. The cabin behind them was just wood and nails, but to her it would always be more. A place where death had circled but life had taken root. A place where a warning, share my blanket or die, had turned into something far richer. They set off together, their boots crunching over fresh snow. The trail ahead was hard, the land wild and unforgiving, yet neither feared it now. Each step they took felt lighter, as if the storm had burned away what no longer mattered. Jack carried his pack with his usual calm, but he no longer walked 3 paces ahead. Eliza matched him stride for stride, her chin lifted against the wind. At one point she looked at him with a smile that carried both challenge and warmth. "Don't think I'll make it easy on you. I'll still argue, still fight when I have to." Jack's laugh was quiet, low in his chest. Wouldn't want it any other way. They walked on, the wilderness stretching before them, a canvas untouched. The storm had tried to break them. Instead it had bound them, and though no words were spoken, the truth was clear in every glance, every step. They had found more than survival. They had found each other, the mountains, cold and vast, watched in silence as 2 souls walked forward, not as strangers, but as something new, and in that endless wild, their story had only just begun. If you enjoyed this tale from the frontier, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Shadow Frontier Tales for more Wild West stories. Share it with someone who loves timeless romance and rugged adventure, and join us again on the next trail.